Hello class, welcome to lesson 7-1, which is all about multiplying monomials. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to multiply monomials and simplify expressions involving monomials. So a couple new vocab terms for this section. A monomial is a number, so example 3. A variable could be x or m or y, whatever you want. Or the product of a number and one or more variables with non-negative integer exponents. So that means all of these are examples of exponents. Some non-examples is if we had 3 divided by x. You can't divide by a variable. This is not a monomial. Another example could be if we had 3x to the negative second power. That is another non-example, okay? Or if I had 3x plus y, that is a non-example because we are adding that x to it. Constant is another form of a monomial, okay? So a constant would be our 3. That would be another example of a monomial. Okay, let's look at our first example where we want to determine whether each expression is a monomial. Write yes or no, and then you need to explain your reasoning. So if we look at our first example, we have 1a, negative x plus 5. This is not a monomial because we are adding 2 different terms. So not a monomial because we are adding 2 terms. Okay. Letter B, we have 23abcd squared. This is a monomial because we have a number times several variables. The variables are only 2 positive exponents. So this is a monomial. 1c, we have x, y, z squared divided by 2. This is a monomial because even though we're dividing by a whole number and not a variable. So this is okay. That is an example of a monomial. Letter D, mp divided by n would be no because we are dividing by a variable. Alright, why don't you go ahead and try this first one on your own, see how you do. Hopefully you determined that the only monomial here was x to the 5th power. If you have questions about that, be sure to ask. Example 2, or before example 2, we're going to talk about the product of powers. Hopefully this is review for you. But if you have a variable, so in this case a, and it's two different numbers for powers, all you have to do is add them. So if you're multiplying, I'm going to highlight this section for you because these are, I think, what really help you guys understand what this product of powers means. If I have b to the 3rd times b to the 5th, I take b to the 3rd plus 5, or b to the 8th, and I end up at the same power. Okay, so let's apply that idea here when we go to simplify our expressions. First, if you have constants or whole numbers, what you do is you start by multiplying those together. So I have 21, and then I have y to the 4th times y to the 5th, which ends up being y to the 4th, and you do 4 plus 5. So 21y to the 9th power is my answer. The next one, I take my numbers again. I have a negative 4 times the negative 6. That gives me a positive 24. I have r and r to the 5th. Remember, whenever you have a variable and it's just r or x or y and there's no number, that's always to the 1st power. So I have r to the 1st plus that 5. I have x to the 2nd plus that 2nd. And then I have t to the 3rd plus, remember there's a 1 here, and that's not a 0. So I have 24 r to the 6th, x to the 4th, and t to the 4th. One habit I want you guys to get into is alphabetizing your variables. So 24, r comes first, t comes second, and x comes third. And that would be your answer. Okay? Whenever possible, alphabetize your variables. Go ahead and simplify this next example. Hopefully you determined that the answer was 20 times x to the 5th. If not, that's okay. You have another chance to get it right. Hopefully you decided that the correct answer was negative 6y to the third, or x to the third, y to the 5th. If you have questions on either of those, be sure to ask for some help. Okay, so we talked about the product of powers. Now let's talk about powers to powers. So if I had b to the third to the 5th power, this is when, instead of adding them, power to powers, you multiply. So you end up at b to the 15th. Or if I had g to the 6th to the 7th power, that's g to the 6 times 7, or g to the 42nd power. All right. So we want to simplify these expressions. So I have my base number, which is 2. Then I have a 2 to the 2nd power, so I'm going to multiply. And that is to the 4th power. So I have 2 to the 2 times 2 times 4, or I have 2 to the 16th. And 2 to the 16th is 65,536. Anytime you guys have whole numbers to a power, please multiply it out and determine what that number is. Okay, so here I have a base of 3, and I have to the 2nd, to the 3rd, and to the 2nd power. So that becomes 3 to the 12th power, or 531,441. Go ahead and try one on your own. Hopefully you decided the answer was 4 to the 12th power. If not, be sure to ask for some help. Alright, so we've talked about product of powers, power to powers. Now let's talk about the power of a different product, okay? So if I have a bunch of numbers being multiplied within parentheses, and I have a power on the outside, what happens then? It gets distributed to every single variable inside those parentheses. So this is a good example, and then it ends up being reduced to that, or simplified to that. Okay, so if we look at example 4, we want to express this area of a square. So let's draw a square. And the area of a square is the side squared. And then, with a square, all of our sides are congruent. And the length of each side is 3xy squared. So if I want to find the area, instead of writing s for the side, I'm going to write 3xy squared. And I have to square that whole thing. So I take this 2, and I square my 3. So it becomes a 9. I square my x, so x squared. And I square my y. So I have y to the 2 times 2, or 4th power. And I know that my area equals 9 times x squared to the times y to the 4th units squared. Okay? For b, if I want to express the area of a triangle, so remember area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. And I know my height is 4a, and my base is 5ab squared. What is the answer as a monomial? So I take that, I have a equals 1/2. My base is 5ab squared, and my height is 4a. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is I'm going to take all of my numbers. I have 1/2 times 5 times 4. Then I have a times b squared. So I have to figure out how I simplify these. 1/2 times 5 times 4 is 10 times a, remember these are each the first, so this becomes not a, but a squared and b squared. So 10 a squared b squared units squared, because we are talking about area. So we label our answers. Okay, go ahead and express the surface area of the cube as a monomial. Remember, surface area means you're going to find the surface or the area of each side of the cube and then add them all together. Hopefully you ended up with 24p squared q squared. If you have any questions about that, be sure to ask. Now let's just talk quickly about simplifying expressions. Remember, in order for a monomial to be completely simplified, you need to have each variable base that appears only once. That means I can't have 25a squared b cubed a to the 7th because I have two different a's. I need to combine those to the a to the 9th. Same thing goes if I add a 3a squared 4b squared. That would not be simplified until I combined my 3 times 4. Okay, so that's what that means. There are no powers of powers. Okay, so we don't have any more of these. I have gotten rid of my powers of powers, and all of my fractions are in simplest form. Okay, so let's look at what that looks like exactly. So if I want to simplify this problem, and I have 1/2 a squared b squared to the 3rd, first I need to get rid of all of my powers, so I'm going to distribute that 1/2 to the 3rd power, a squared to the 3rd power, b squared to the 3rd power, and this is being multiplied by negative 4b squared all to the 2nd power. So I'm going to simplify the first half a little bit first. So I have 1/8 times a to the 6th times b to the 6th. Then if I get rid of this squared, that becomes negative 4 squared is 16b squared, and that's to the 2nd power. So if I do 16 squared, I end up with 256. B, I do my power to power, so I end up with b to the 4th. And this is all still being multiplied by b to the 6th, a to the 6th, and that 1/8. Draw a line to help separate. Now I take my numbers. I have 1/8 and 256. So that's 256 divided by 8. And that equals, I want to simplify that right away. That ends up being 32. Now let's see what about my a's. I have a to the 6th, and that's my only a, so I'm going to leave that. I'm done with everything I'm crossing off. I'm left with b to the 6th times b to the 4th. So that becomes b to the 10th power. I no longer have any bases that are repeated. I don't have any powers to powers, so I am done. I am as simplified as I can get on this one. Go ahead and try to simplify this last problem on your own, see how you do. Hopefully you ended up with 1,728 c to the 27th power, d to the 24th power. If you have any questions on that at all, please be sure to ask for some help. Have a fantastic day.